Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to House Joint Resolution 542.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to see Delegate Lemunion's remarks towards the end of his summary talk about our founding fathers. Anybody that has an appreciation of history, of Virginia, of the birth of this nation, of the genesis of our government, would realize what a seminal moment this is today in Virginia, where we are considering rewriting our Constitution and abandoning the notion of federalism. I will point out, Mr. Speaker, that we're not just talking about repealing a federal law enacted by Congress. We're also talking about, if you look at the gentleman's language, line 35, any provision of law includes the Constitution. We're now saying the Constitution is the ultimate law in the country, and we are considering, with 2/3 of states' votes, repealing any law passed by Congress, including our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, one of my favorite Irish authors is Oscar Wilde. And if Oscar Wilde was here, he would say to you, I think your idea is clever, but basically terrible. And here's why it's so terrible. First of all, let's look at what our common ground is. The gentleman, when he gave his summary, talked about a strong central government. And there's his suggestion, it has gotten too strong. Let's agree with that for the sake of argument. Don't you know that when Virginia ratified this 222 years ago, they were concerned about a strong central government? They just fought a war against a tyrannical government, and when they met in Philadelphia, the 55 framers and the 39 authors, that's the greatest threat to this new government, a large, uncontrolled, unbridled central government. That was first and foremost in their minds. And they created a government based on the concept of federalism that would deal with that. Now, what we have here now is the suggestion that these 7 articles in this Constitution and the Constitution itself has to be reworked because federal government has gotten too strong. Our founders thought about that. They considered what would happen if the federal government passed a law that we didn't like. They came up with 2 solutions. 2 solutions. 1, vote the rascals out of office. Number 2, challenge it in the federal courts on the constitutionality of that law. And just those 2 things are being done right now. In fact, last year, the grand old party was very successful in electing new members to Congress, throwing some of the old, perhaps, rascals out. That's what the founders considered, and that's what was done. Second, our Attorney General right now is challenging the Patient Protection Act based on its constitutionality. So they thought there was a possibility central big government would get too large, and they came up with solutions. Now, one of our conservative members of this House, on the other side, opined recently that if 2/3 of the state could repeal a federal law, it would create a lot of mischief. And in his op-ed piece, he referred to repealing parts of the Constitution, repealing military appropriations, Social Security, a declaration of war, the Civil Rights Act. Nowhere, and this is what's so crucial, in our Constitution did those 55 framers ever consider the fact that 2/3 of the states would repeal a federal law. Now, Mr. Speaker, since I came into this General Assembly, I've listened time and time again as the majority party has wrapped itself in the Constitution, preaching fidelity to the Constitution time and time and time again. Until now. If you don't like a part of the Constitution, repeal it. But every other instance, just wrap yourself in that flag, stand on that soapbox, preach fidelity to the Constitution, and look at the minority party and say, you got it wrong. There was a recent op-ed piece in the Washington Post. That's one of Delegate Marshall's favorite newspapers. Quote, Messrs. Cantor, Bishop, and other supporters of the Repeal Amendment believe they are rebalancing the Constitution. But it's strange that the lawmakers would show their reverence to the following founding fathers by redrafting their work. And that's what we're doing. We're redrafting the Constitution. Now, this document was what our founding fathers spent a long time getting it right, balancing a strong central government and a state government. They debated for 3 months in Philadelphia. They spent almost 19 months ratifying it. And in fact, many people in this body have repeatedly said that there must have been some type of divine intervention because they got it right and it's lasted for over 223 years. Until now. Until now. Now, the gentleman gave us several reasons why federal government is bad and is wrong. I'm not going to dispute that. That there are many times when they overreach their authority. The question isn't, do they overreach their authority? Sure they do. I'm with you. The question is, do we correct it by redrafting this sacred document? That's the issue. Now, he gave you several suggestions as to why it's bad. Let me point out that you don't treat this sacred document willy-nilly. After the first 10 amendments were passed, we've gone 220 years before we added the additional 16 amendments. How often do we amend the Constitution? I'll give you an example. Between the 12th Amendment and the 13th Amendment, 61 years went by before we amended it. You don't amend sacred documents often. Between the 15th and the 16th Amendment, 43 years went by. Now, let me give you some concrete examples why it's bad. The gentleman referred to smaller states having an unfair advantage or a disproportionate influence. They do. Many of our states, Alaska, with 710,000 citizens, North Dakota with 672, Wyoming, Vermont with populations in the 600,000, would have the same right, the same vote as California with 36 million members. Mr. Speaker, there actually is a concept that this country has embellished and supported. It's part of our DNA, and that is one person, one vote. I actually take umbrage that 12 Alaskans would have the same vote as one Virginian. That's not fair, and it's absolutely inconsistent with this idea of one vote, one person. Now, the other problem, number two, there's no limit as to what federal legislation could be thrown out. Look at line 35. Delegate Lemunyan referred to it several times. I'm quoting, any provision of law or regulation of the United States, anything, any part of any law could be thrown out. Now, if 2/3 of the states could throw out, for example, a federal tax bill, what would they do with the appropriations part of it? What if you threw out the tax bill, but you agreed with the declaration of war? How would we pay for that war? Third thing, what I love is managing our time. Delegate Lemunyan referred to Congress getting too big, and how can 535 members of Congress deal with all this legislation? The solution? Let us do it now. We don't have enough work here, Mr. Speaker, to keep us busy for 8 weeks. Anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 bills come through this body every year. We spend often from 6 o'clock in the morning until 12 midnight towards the end of the session dealing with Virginia legislation. But now We're going to turn our ears and our eyes and our heads and our minds and our hearts to the federal legislation. Do we go all year round? Those lobbyists that are watching right now, they just love that idea. This is the lobbyist job bill. They can be here all year round. And Mr. Speaker, does the Delegate Putney have the money in appropriations to pay all these legislators to go year round? I thought that one of the major planks of the grand old party is limited government. How can we possibly review thousands of pieces of federal legislation without expanding this government? Number 5, what happens when regional state interests trump national ones? What if we want to repeal a law because the regional economic interests trump the national ones? I got 3 words: American Civil War. 6th problem. Right now, the President of the United States cannot veto, does not have the power to exercise a line item veto. Once again, this legislation allows 2/3 of the state to repeal any provision, any portion of any federal law, thereby giving 2/3, including the smaller states, more power than the President of the United States. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, your party, the Republican Party, gained control of the House of Representatives last year. You did it because it was done in a way that our founding fathers contemplated. You voted old people out, new people in. But this House Joint Resolution, Mr. Speaker, it's poorly thought out, it's poorly planned, it's poorly executed, it's poorly conceived. What we have here is some angst holding over from the Patient Protection Act. As a result of that, what have we done? We've decided, some folks have, that we've got to completely redo the Constitution. And that, Mr. Speaker, is wrong. I'd point out that Delegate Lemunion's suggestion with House Joint Resolution is the first time we would be doing this in 220 years. And all 27 amendments, we have never proposed an amendment to the Constitution in a manner proposed by the delegate. But we're doing it now. Mr. Speaker, this House Joint Resolution isn't just controversial, it's dangerous. It's not just unnecessary, it's unpatriotic. Mr. Speaker, House Joint Resolution clearly shows that not only has the majority party have no fidelity to this document, this Constitution, you don't pay homage or devotion just to little snippets of it. You either agree with the whole thing or nothing. And for 234 years, we've agreed with that entire Constitution. I know that the majority party is eager to embrace only some portions of it, Mr. Speaker, but what we don't do, and what we don't do in Virginia, is we don't just jettison those parts of the Constitution that we don't like. We don't just disregard a provision of the Constitution like last year's New Year's resolution. And we all know what's happening here, because let's just call it the way it is. We're posturing and we're pandering to our base. We've climbed up on that soapbox and we've screamed state sovereignty as loud as we can, because there's an election coming up. And we've thrown a little red meat out to pacify the base, and we've done it in the name of rewriting our Constitution. Not me, not today, not ever, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.